Welcome back to Melbourne Property TV. On the panel tonight, we're discussing buying a unit or an apartment. There are many questions you have to answer before you lay your hard-earned money down. To discuss those on the panel from Archicentre, David Hallett. Welcome,
Yes.
David. From the REIV, Robert Larocca, and local architect Ingrid Mountford.
That is.
Now, Ingrid, we might kick off with you. Internally, you're looking for an apartment. When you're looking for an apartment or a unit, what are some of the things to consider as far as the internal layout goes?
Sure does. Look, there's a few things to keep in mind. A lot of new developments certainly have a display that you can go and have a look at, and that often includes a mock-up of the unit, perhaps a particular type of unit, sometimes a model of the actual building. And it is worth having a good look at those and to ask or be really aware of perhaps what scale of that unit is in terms of, is it the more budget one you're looking at, or sometimes there's a premium, a range of apartments within the building, and to be assured that you know what kind of fittings and fixtures you're getting, whether you're actually, the one you're looking at will have those fixtures that are on display, or whether a cheaper one in the building perhaps has a different sort of level of fixtures, and they're all probably quite okay, but it's just good to know which level you're looking at. Another one certainly is to be aware of the aspect of the apartment that you're looking at. You'll often see a plan of the building, for instance, and know maybe which apartments are in the price range you're looking at. But it's really good to be aware too of where those apartments actually sit in the building.
And I also imagine, Robert, what's next door, or David, what you're actually looking at next door as well, I suppose, if that's not built into the model itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as Ingrid said, the aspect's very important, and it's partly about the orientation of it and what sunshine are you going to get or not get, but it's also about the view out. What are you going to be looking at? How high is this apartment? What views does it take in? Do you have a lovely view over parkland or rooftops, or are you looking straight into the tower next door? And of course, they'll be looking straight in at you.
And can that be built out, I suppose?
Exactly. So it's really important to have a good understanding of where this apartment sits within this proposed new building, because a lot of apartments are bought and sold off the plan. So there's nothing to actually look at. You've got to be able to read the drawings, understand where the apartment sits in the model, and be able to visualise what you're going to end up with.
Well, they had that case in the press recently where an apartment building in the city is going to be built out, and people who had a balcony will be something like 8 inches or something from the other.
That's right.
They'll be just living in basically in a hole.
So to the extent that you can check this out beforehand, it really is critical too, because you'll have an image of that apartment in your head, but you've got to be fairly confident that that's what you're going to actually end up with.
I mean, it's a real issue when you're buying off the plan, is, as compared to an established dwelling where you can see that building, you can get a sense of how it sits in its environment. Off the plan, you've got to be really tight with the contract. You need legal advice on that contract to make sure exactly what you talked about, that the fixtures are what you're expecting, and also the delivery time, because the developer will sell a unit off the plan, and they'll have a certain time frame in the contract they can have to deliver that. And they've got your deposit for that entirety, for that time. So, there is a different contractual process when buying off the plan to buying an established house, and, good legal advice is really important at that stage.
And also, when looking, I guess, people buying properties as investment, not just to live in, and obviously where you're driven by capital return, so obviously important to take into consideration those sorts of things. What are the drivers you're looking at?
Look, a wise member of ours once said, you've got to be careful on that first purchase off the plan. The value of that building is established by what the developer wants to get for it. By the developer's costs, not so much by what the market will bear. Whereas the second and third and fourth sales are literally just what the market will bear and provide a truer indication of that property's value. So, if you're going into off the plan, be aware of the risks and the potential pitfalls, as well as the benefits, and have a long-term view of that, because you're unlikely to make a quick return because of the amount of supply, particularly in the inner city as well.
Which is what we saw down at Docklands in recent years, I guess. A lot of people buying off the plan, some then selling, some people finding they couldn't get the money they'd paid for it, so they have to hang on and sit tight. So,
or perhaps not the lifestyle they thought it was going to be, for all sorts of reasons. The other thing to be very wary of course, is the obligations that owners have in respect of property maintenance, which is probably less of a problem with a newer apartment building where you're buying off the plan, but it's certainly an issue for people buying older apartment, let's say 1930s apartments or even 1960s walk-up flats, for example. As an owner, you take a responsibility for the maintenance of the common areas. So if a lot of maintenance needs to be done, if the roof needs to be replaced, or all of the windows need upgrading, or if the car park needs to be repaved, for example, you're going to be asked to contribute a portion of that.
It's good. The larger, newer blocks have to have maintenance plans and also a fund put aside for that, because you're right. When you buy into the common property, you're effectively buying a house or a flat and a share of a lift and a share of a car park. You know, you own part of that lift, and that's part of your problem as well. We've concentrated a lot on some of the pitfalls, but there's some benefits too.
Well, the only other thing that always springs to mind with me, a lot of the big apartment blocks, if you've got a gym and you've got a concierge, or that can be $300 a week basically to maintain that, which is factors that have to be taken into consideration. But again, it comes back to lifestyle choice, I guess, doesn't it? If people are making that decision. That's
right, and I think that the other benefit that we haven't touched on is that there are often benefits that you don't get in an individual house, like a gym and maybe a lovely outdoor area that somebody else actually maintains for you. You're not necessarily spending your weekends looking after the garden, somebody else is, and yet you get the great benefit of a space where you can invite friends and have a terrific way of life without actually maintaining it yourself. So,
and affordability and location. I mean, there's one real reason why units and apartments have done so well in Melbourne over the last decade or so. Location. You look and try and buy a detached house in Richmond, in Brunswick, in Footscray, or in St Kilda, and you'll find that's not as affordable as a unit or apartment. Often, a unit or apartment in those suburbs, the median prices are $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 cheaper. So lifestyle choice.
Robert, we've seen a big upward trend towards apartment living, and for obvious reasons, baby boomers, people staying single or for whatever reason. Do you see that continuing?
It has to continue. Otherwise, Melbourne will become Warragul, quite simply. If the city doesn't expand upwards, it will expand out, and it's not sustainable for us to do that. So that's why half of the city's new housing really has to be delivered in medium high density. But you just don't imagine tall South Bank towers when you imagine that. Imagine, eight-storey in inner ring suburbs around transport hubs. That's the sort of thing you'll see more of, not just even in Melbourne, in other capital cities as well.
So obviously, David, it comes back to when you're buying an apartment, research is, knowledge is power, I suppose.
Yeah, well, look, it's clearly, they're clearly in demand. They wouldn't be building and they wouldn't be selling if they weren't in demand. But there's still some homework that people need to do, particularly around older apartments, I'd suggest, and of course, visualising what their new apartment is going to look like as well.
All right. Ingrid, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks,
Robert, David, we'll be back with more Melbourne Property TV in just a moment.